There are moments in life when you are publicly humiliated, stripped of dignity, exposed as inadequate, reduced to tears in front of dozens of witnesses. And in that moment of crushing shame, you cry out to God, asking why He allowed this to happen, why He didn't defend you, why He left you defenseless against an intellectual attack you had no training to counter. My name is Antonia Salzano. I am 59 years old, and I am the mother of Carlo Acutis, the teenager who died of leukemia on October 12, 2006, at age 15, and was beatified on October 10, 2020. For 18 years, I have accompanied thousands of pilgrims who visit my son's tomb in the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore in Aisi, in Italy, answering questions about his life, sharing his teachings, praying with families seeking comfort or intercession, always trying to maintain an attitude of Christian hospitality that reflects the unconditional love Carlo lived during his 15 years. I have received people of all religions and backgrounds with the same respect: devout Catholics, curious Protestants, skeptical atheists, seeking agnostics, and even some Muslims who come out of cultural or academic interest in this phenomenon of the modern teenage saint. But there is one specific encounter I experienced on August 3rd, 2024, an encounter that, for the 2 hours it lasted, made me feel such profound public humiliation that night in my hotel room in Assisi, I cried not from sadness but from rage and helplessness at the injustice of having been verbally attacked with aggressive theological arguments that I had no academic preparation to adequately refute. A Muslim Imam of approximately 45 years old named Yusuf al-Mansour, originally from Egypt but resident in Milan where he directs a Salafist mosque, arrived at Carlo's tomb apparently out of curiosity, as he initially told me, but which quickly revealed itself as a deliberate visit with an agenda of theological confrontation. For nearly 2 hours, in front of approximately 40 Catholic pilgrims present that day, he subjected me to public interrogation about Catholic doctrines, aggressively questioned the veneration of saints as unforgivable shirk, idolatry in Islam, challenged the incorruptibility of Carlo's body as a chemical preservation trick, and especially accused me of being a mother who exploits her son's death to promote Christian idolatry, all with a tone of intellectual superiority that left me completely disarmed. Because every time I tried to respond with simple arguments of faith, he dismantled them with Quranic logic that I didn't know how to theologically counter. I am a mother, not a theologian. My answers came from the heart, from simple faith, not from years of academic study. And he exposed that inadequacy mercilessly, publicly, in front of people who looked to me as Carlo's mother to defend our faith. What happened exactly 3 weeks after that humiliation, when I received an email from that same Imam, Yusuf al-Mansour, asking for forgiveness in such a deep and detailed way that I initially thought it was a cruel joke, until he verified his identity with photographs and documents, not only healed my emotional wound, but taught me one of the most important lessons I have learned in 18 years of sharing Carlo's story, that sometimes God allows us to be humiliated precisely so that the subsequent transformation of the humiliator becomes more powerful testimony than any theological argument I could have offered in that moment. God didn't defend me that day because he was preparing a greater defense, one that would come not through my words, but through my son's intervention from heaven, reaching even into the dreams of a Muslim Imam who came to attack and left 3 weeks later as a penitent seeking forgiveness. This is the story of my worst day as Carlo's mother, and how it became one of the most powerful testimonies of his continuing intercession To understand why Yusuf al-Mansour's attack devastated me so completely, you need to understand who I thought I was on August 3rd, 2024. A woman who had spent 18 years accompanying pilgrims, who had answered thousands of questions, who had developed what I believed were adequate responses to most objections or curiosities about Carlo and Catholic faith. I was not naive. Over nearly 2 decades, I had encountered skeptics, critics, and challengers. Atheists who dismissed Carlo's incorruptibility as natural phenomenon. Protestants who questioned Catholic devotion to saints. Journalists who implied Carlo's cult was marketing strategy. Even some Catholics who were uncomfortable with how quickly his cause for beatification had progressed. But I had learned to navigate those encounters. With atheists, I would acknowledge that faith transcends scientific proof, while pointing to medical documentation of Carlo's incorruptibility. With Protestants, I would emphasize that we don't worship saints, but ask their intercession, just as they might ask living friends to pray for them. With skeptical journalists, I would simply share Carlo's story, authentically, and let them draw their own conclusions. These weren't sophisticated theological arguments, but they were sufficient for most situations. And when someone asked questions I couldn't answer theologically, I would honestly say, I'm Carlo's mother, not a theologian, but I can share what I experienced, what I witnessed, and what thousands of people have reported experiencing through his intercession. That humility about my limitations had always worked. People appreciated my honesty. They didn't expect Carlo's mother to be an academic expert in Catholic doctrine. They expected me to be authentic, loving, and genuine in sharing my son's story. Until August 3rd, 2024, when authenticity and simple faith proved devastatingly insufficient. It was Saturday morning around 10:30 a.m. I was in the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore in Aisi, as I typically am several days each month to accompany pilgrims visiting Carlo's tomb. That day there were approximately 40 people in the chapel where Carlo's body is displayed. Italian families, some foreign tourists, a group of young people from a Spanish parish. The atmosphere was peaceful, devotional. Several people were kneeling in prayer. Some were taking photographs. A young mother was explaining to her children who Carlo was and why his body hadn't decomposed. It was a typical morning. Quiet, respectful, filled with the kind of gentle spiritual presence that characterizes most visits to Carlo's tomb. Then I saw him enter. A man of approximately 45 years old, dark complexion, well-groomed black beard, dressed in traditional white Islamic tunic and kufi, Muslim cap. His appearance wasn't unusual. Aisi attracts visitors of all backgrounds, and I had welcomed Muslim visitors before, always with the same hospitality I extend to everyone. He walked directly to Carlo's tomb, observed the body behind the glass for several minutes with an expression I couldn't decipher. Not devotional, not curious, but almost analytical, clinical, as if he were examining a museum specimen rather than paying respects to someone's son. After several minutes, he turned and saw me sitting on a side bench, where I typically position myself to be available for conversations. He walked purposefully toward me. "Are you Antonia Salzano, Carlo Acutis' mother?" he asked in Italian with a strong Arabic accent. "Yes, I am," I responded with my usual tone of hospitality. "Can I help you with something?" "I am Yusuf al-Mansour, Imam of the Al-Nur Mosque in Milan. I came out of curiosity to see this phenomenon that many Muslims in Italy talk about, the Catholic teenager whose body doesn't decompose." "It's an honor to welcome you," I said sincerely. I had interacted with Muslim visitors before, and always tried to be respectful of their tradition while sharing Carlo's story. If you have questions about Carlo, I'm happy to answer them. I have many questions, he responded with a tone that immediately put me on alert. It wasn't a tone of respectful curiosity, but of barely contained challenge. But first, I need to clarify my position. I came not to convert to Christianity, but to understand why Catholics commit the sin of shirk by venerating the dead. I felt immediate tension. Shirk. I knew enough about Islam to know this is their term for idolatry, for the unforgivable sin of attributing partners to God. Mr. Al-Mansour, Catholics don't worship Carlo. We venerate him as an example of holiness. There's a difference between worship, which we give only to God, and veneration. There is no difference. He interrupted me with a raised voice that caused several people in the chapel to turn their heads. Any form of directing devotion towards someone other than Allah is shirk, the unforgivable sin. And you, as a mother, are promoting this shirk by exploiting your son's death. I felt as if I had been slapped. Sir, that's not fair. Not fair? His voice now clearly audible to everyone in the chapel. You have your son's body on public display. People come to pray to him, to ask him for miracles. How is that different from pagan idolatry? In Islam, when someone dies, we bury them within 24 hours with humility. We don't exhibit them as objects of cult. Several people had moved closer, some clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation. I tried to maintain calm. The incorruptibility of Carlo's body wasn't our decision. It was a phenomenon that occurred naturally. Naturally? He interrupted again with evident sarcasm. Signora, I am an educated man. I have studied science. Incorruptibility can be explained by specific environmental conditions, chemical treatments, embalming. It's not proof of holiness. It's biology and chemistry. The doctors who examined the body confirmed there was no artificial treatment. Catholic doctors! He cut me off. Do you expect me to believe they were objective? Of course they'll say what the church wants them to say. It's like asking the fox to guard the henhouse. I felt my face burning with a mixture of embarrassment and rising anger, but I tried to respond calmly. Mr. Al-Mansour, I understand you have different beliefs, but this is a sacred place for Catholics. People come here to pray. To pray to a dead teenager instead of to God. He interrupted yet again. This is exactly what Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, warned against. He specifically forbade building monuments over graves or turning burial sites into places of worship because he knew humans would fall into idol worship. What followed was 90 minutes of relentless theological interrogation. Not dialogue, not respectful exchange, but what felt like a prosecutorial attack designed to expose my inadequacy. Yusuf systematically dismantled every Catholic doctrine I mentioned. On the Trinity. You Catholics claim to worship one God, but then say God is 3 persons. That's not monotheism, that's mathematical impossibility, disguised as mystery. The Quran is clear. They have certainly disbelieved who say, Allah is the 3rd of 3, and there is no God, except one God. You have taken a beautiful Jewish teaching about God's unity and corrupted it with pagan concepts of divine multiplicity. I tried to explain. The Trinity is one God in 3 persons, not 3 gods. Signora, don't insult my intelligence. 3 persons means 3 centers of consciousness, 3 wills, 3 distinct entities. That's polytheism, no matter what linguistic gymnastics you use to deny it. On the Eucharist. You believe that bread and wine become the actual flesh and blood of Jesus, and then you eat this flesh and drink this blood? In Islam, we have strict prohibitions against consuming blood. What you describe sounds like symbolic cannibalism, and you expect me to believe this is holy. I tried to explain transubstantiation, the real presence, Carlo's particular devotion to the Eucharist. But every explanation I offered, Yusuf countered with Quranic verses or rational arguments that I didn't have the theological training to address. On Jesus, Isa in Arabic, was a great prophet, a servant of Allah, but he was human, not divine. The Quran is explicit. The Messiah, son of Mary, was not but a messenger. You Christians have elevated a human prophet to the status of God, which is the worst form of shirk, and then you wonder why Muslims reject Christianity. I tried to explain that Jesus claimed divinity, that his resurrection proved his claims, that the early Christians worshipped him as God. But Yusuf dismissed all of this. The Gospels were written decades after Jesus died, by people who never met him, in a language he didn't speak. They're historically unreliable documents, corrupted by theological agendas. The Quran, revealed directly from Allah to Muhammad, corrects these Christian errors. On Mary. You Catholics have practically made Mary a fourth member of your Trinity. You pray to her, build shrines to her, claim she was sinless, and assumed into heaven. The Quran honors Maryam as the mother of Prophet Isa, but you've turned her into a goddess. We don't worship Mary, I protested. We honor her as the mother of God, but we don't worship her. Mother of God, Yusuf repeated mockingly. Do you hear how absurd that sounds? God doesn't have a mother. God is eternal, uncreated. Mary was a pious woman, but she was human. To call her Mother of God is to diminish God's transcendence. And if this channel has been an answer for you, consider leaving a super thanks. This financial help, however small it may seem, sustains this mission and allows us to continue bringing deep and transformative content to more lives that need this word. The worst part wasn't just that Yusuf had theological arguments I couldn't counter. It was how he framed my inability to respond as evidence that Catholic faith was intellectually bankrupt. Signora Salzano, he said at one point, loudly enough for everyone in the chapel to hear. I don't mean to be unkind, but you cannot defend Catholic doctrine, because Catholic doctrine is indefensible. It's built on logical contradictions, historical corruptions, and pagan influences. You are a sincere woman, I can see that. But your sincerity doesn't make your beliefs true. I felt tears forming in my eyes, which I tried desperately to hide. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry, but he saw my emotional response and rather than backing off, pressed harder. I see this affects you emotionally. That's because in your heart, you know I'm speaking truth. Faith isn't supposed to be blind emotion. It's supposed to be based on sound reasoning and clear evidence. Islam provides that. Christianity asks you to accept mysteries that violate logic. One of the pilgrims present, an Italian man of about 60 years old, finally intervened. Signore, with respect, you came to a sacred Catholic place. If you don't agree with our beliefs, why did you come? Yusuf turned to him sharply. I came because I have the right to question what I consider dangerous theological error. And I came because I wanted to see if the mother of this supposed saint could defend her beliefs. Clearly she cannot. He gestured toward me dismissively. Look at her. She's a mother who loves her son. That I respect, but that love has blinded her. She has turned her son's tomb into a place of idolatry. And all of you, he gestured broadly to the pilgrims present, are being deceived by her promotion of this cult of the dead. In Islam, This would be considered bid'ah, forbidden innovation that leads to hell. The confrontation finally ended when Yusuf apparently decided he had made his point. I have said what I came to say. I hope some of you will reflect seriously on the theological problems I've raised. Truth matters more than tradition or sentiment. He looked at me one final time. Signora Salzano, I don't wish you harm, but I believe you are on a dangerous path, and you are leading others down that path. I pray that Allah guides you to truth. And then he left, walked out of the chapel with the same confidence he had entered, leaving me sitting on that bench, trembling, feeling the pitying gazes of the 40 or so pilgrims who had witnessed my public humiliation. An elderly woman approached and hugged me. Don't listen to him, Signora. That man was just looking for a fight. A young priest who had been present offered to report Yusuf to Basilica authorities for disrupting worship. Several people expressed outrage at how disrespectfully he had treated me, but their sympathy somehow made it worse. I didn't want to be pitied. I didn't want to be seen as a victim who had been defeated in theological combat. I wanted to have been able to defend Carlo, to defend Catholic faith, to respond to Yusuf's attacks with convincing arguments. Instead, I had failed, publicly, humiliatingly. That night in my hotel room in Aisi, I broke down completely. I cried for hours, not gentle tears of sadness, but angry, frustrated, wounded sobs that came from a place of deep humiliation. I cried from shame. Why couldn't I defend you, Carlo? Why couldn't I answer his arguments? I'm your mother. I should be able to explain why you were special, why your life mattered, why Catholic faith is true. I cried from anger at Yusuf. How dare he come to my son's tomb and attack me? How dare he call Carlo's memory idolatry? How dare he humiliate me in front of people who came to pray? I cried from self-doubt. Maybe he was right. Maybe I am just a mother blinded by love. Maybe I don't really understand Catholic theology well enough to share Carlo's story. Maybe I should step back and let theologians and clergy handle this. And I cried out to God. Why did you let this happen? Why didn't you give me the words to respond? Why didn't you defend me? I was defending your church, your faith, my son who loved you so much. Why did you leave me helpless? I finally fell asleep around 3 a.m., exhausted from crying, my prayer unanswered, my questions unresolved. The next morning I woke with eyes swollen from crying and a headache from emotional exhaustion. I had planned to spend another day in Aisi, accompanying more pilgrims, but I couldn't face it. The thought of returning to Carlo's tomb, of encountering people who might have heard about yesterday's confrontation, felt unbearable. I took an early train back to Milan and spent the next week in a kind of emotional paralysis. I continued my normal life, household tasks, some administrative work for the Carlo Acutis Foundation, meetings with my husband Andrea. But internally, I was replaying the confrontation with Yusuf obsessively, thinking of all the things I should have said, all the responses I could have given, if only I had been better prepared. I also began questioning myself more deeply. Had I become too comfortable in my role as Carlo's mother who shares his story? Had I been relying on sentiment and personal testimony when what was needed was rigorous theological knowledge? Should I step back from public ministry and let more qualified people represent Carlo's cause? About a week after the incident, I confided in Father Marco Gisolfi, a priest who has been spiritual advisor to our family since Carlo's death. I described the confrontation in detail, including my inability to respond adequately to Yusuf's arguments. Father Marco listened patiently, then offered perspective that was both comforting and challenging. Antonia, You're right that you're not a theologian, but that's not your role. Your role is to be authentic witness to Carlo's life and to how his example continues to transform people. When you try to become something you're not, academic apologist, trained debater, you lose the power of your actual gift, genuine maternal love that draws people to Carlo's story. But Father, I was humiliated. I couldn't answer his questions. He made Catholic faith look foolish. He made you feel foolish, Father Marco corrected gently. That's different from actually refuting Catholic faith. Antonia, aggressive debaters like this Imam have a strategy. They overwhelm opponents with rapid-fire arguments, don't allow time for thoughtful response, and declare victory when their opponent becomes emotional or can't immediately counter every claim. It's not honest intellectual dialogue. It's rhetorical bullying. But what should I have done differently? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps God allowed you to be in that situation precisely as you were. Not as a trained theologian, but as a mother defending her son with simple faith. And perhaps the lesson isn't about what you should have done, but about what God might do with this situation that we can't yet see. Father Marco's words helped slightly, but I still carried the wound. Every time I thought about returning to Aisi to accompany pilgrims, I felt anxiety. What if another hostile visitor came? What if someone else challenged me with arguments I couldn't answer? What if I froze again, cried again, was humiliated again? I also found myself thinking about Yusuf himself. Who was he? What motivated him to come to Carlo's tomb, specifically to confront me? Was he genuinely concerned about what he saw as Catholic theological error? Or was there something more personal driving his aggression? I researched online and found that Yusuf al-Mansur was indeed Imam of a mosque in Milan, the Al-Nur Mosque, which according to several Italian news articles was considered part of the more conservative Salafist tradition within Sunni Islam. He had a presence on social media, primarily in Arabic, but some posts in Italian, where he regularly posted about Islamic theology, critiques of secularism, and occasional critiques of Christian beliefs. I found a video of one of his Friday sermons with Italian subtitles, where he discussed the corruption of monotheism in Christianity. The content was similar to what he had said to me. Arguments about the Trinity contradicting pure monotheism, about veneration of saints being disguised idolatry, about how Christianity had strayed from Jesus' original Jewish monotheism. Watching him preach, I noticed something I hadn't seen during our confrontation. Beneath the intellectual confidence and aggressive argumentation, there was an earnestness. He truly believed he was defending monotheistic truth against corruption. In his mind, he was a faithful servant of Allah correcting dangerous error. That recognition didn't excuse how he had treated me, but it complicated my anger. He wasn't just a cruel bully enjoying humiliation. He was a true believer who saw defending Islamic monotheism as sacred duty. 2 weeks after the incident, I finally returned to Aisi. I forced myself to go back to Carlo's tomb, to sit in my usual place, to be available for pilgrims, despite my lingering anxiety about potential confrontations. The day was quiet. Families came and went. Several people asked questions about Carlo. Normal questions about his life, his interests, his death, his beatification. No one mentioned the confrontation with Yusuf, though I wondered if anyone present had been there that day or heard about it. Around midday, a young Italian couple approached me. The woman was holding a baby, perhaps 3 months old. Signora Salzano, we came from Rome specifically to bring our daughter to Carlo's tomb. She was born premature, with severe health complications. Doctors said she might not survive. We prayed a novena to Carlo, asking his intercession. And she survived, thrived, is perfectly healthy now. They showed me medical documents, before and after. The transformation was remarkable. We named her Carla, feminine version of Carlo, in thanksgiving for his intercession, the mother said, tears in her eyes. I held baby Carla, looking at her healthy pink cheeks, her alert eyes, her obvious vitality, and I thought, this is what matters, not whether I can win theological debates, not whether I can refute every objection, but whether Carlo's intercession continues to touch lives, to bring healing, to draw people closer to God. Your daughter is beautiful, I told them, and Carlo is smiling in heaven, knowing you named her for him. As they left, I felt some of my confidence returning. Yusuf's attacks had shaken me, had exposed my theological limitations, but they didn't change the essential reality. Carlo's life mattered. His example inspired people. His intercession brought grace. That truth didn't depend on my ability to defend it academically. It stood on its own evidence. Still, the wound remained, and I continued to pray. God, if there was some purpose in that humiliation, please show me. Help me understand why you allowed it to happen. On August 24th, 2024, exactly 3 weeks after the confrontation with Yusuf al-Mansur, I woke up and checked my email as usual. Among the dozens of messages was one with a subject line that made my heart stop. Perdón de Yusuf al-Mansur. Forgiveness from Yusuf al-Mansur. My first instinct was that this was spam, or perhaps a cruel joke from someone who had heard about the incident. I almost deleted it without reading, but something made me open it. The email was in Italian, clearly written by someone with limited command of the language, likely translated from Arabic or English, but the content was unmistakable. Signora Salzano, I am Yusuf al-Mansur, the Imam who confronted you aggressively at the tomb of your son Carlo in Aisi 3 weeks ago. I am writing to ask your forgiveness in the deepest way I know how. What I did to you was cruel, unjust, and completely contrary to the true spirit of Islam, which preaches respect and respectful dialogue, even with those whose beliefs differ from ours. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught that we should engage with people of the book, Christians and Jews, with courtesy and wisdom. I did the opposite. I attacked you with intellectual arrogance, humiliated you publicly, and showed no mercy to a mother grieving her son. But more importantly, I need to tell you what happened to me 2 nights after that visit, because without that context, my request for forgiveness doesn't make complete sense. I leaned closer to my computer screen, my heart pounding. 2 nights after my visit to Aisi, on August 5th, I had an extraordinarily vivid dream. In Islam, we believe that true dreams can carry messages from Allah, and this dream had a quality unlike normal dreams. It was clear, detailed, and left me deeply disturbed when I woke. In the dream, I saw Carlo Acutis. I recognized him from the images I had seen in the basilica. Young face, casual clothes, that characteristic sweatshirt. He appeared to me in a place that seemed like a garden, beautiful and peaceful, and he looked at me with an expression of sadness, not anger. And he spoke to me in Arabic, perfect, clear Arabic, that I understood completely. He said, Yusuf, you attacked my mother not out of love for Allah, but out of intellectual pride. Allah does not take pleasure in humiliating the weak to demonstrate that you are strong. Then he said something that cut through my heart. My mother didn't need to be a theologian to defend her love for me. Her love was sufficient answer to all your arguments. You demanded theological sophistication, but what you needed was to see the truth that love reveals, that I loved Allah with all my heart while I was alive, and I continue to love Allah from where I am now. I woke up in cold sweat, deeply shaken. I spent the rest of that night unable to sleep, replaying the dream in my mind. Initially, I tried to dismiss it. It was just a dream, psychological processing of the confrontation, nothing supernatural. But in the following days, I couldn't forget it. The dream haunted me. I consulted with other imams, describing the experience without revealing that the young man in the dream was Carlo. Most told me it was meaningless, just random neural activity during sleep. But one imam I respect greatly, a Sufi scholar in his 80s who is known for his wisdom and spiritual depth, gave me different advice. When I described the dream in detail, including that the young man was the Catholic teenager whose tomb I had visited, he was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Yusuf, the awliya of Allah, the friends of Allah, can sometimes appear in dreams to correct us, to teach us, to guide us. This happens even across religious boundaries, because Allah's friends are not limited by our human categories. Perhaps this young Christian was truly a wali of Allah, and he is correcting your arrogance." Those words shook me deeply. In Islam, we recognize that righteous people, awliya, have special closeness to Allah and can intercede for others. We don't call them saints in the Catholic sense, but the concept is similar. People who lived with such devotion to Allah that even after death, their spiritual influence continues. I began to research your son Carlo more deeply. I read about his devotion to prayer, his love for God, his service to the poor, his acceptance of suffering, his joy even in the face of death. And I realized this was a young person who truly loved Allah, God, even if he understood Allah through Christian theology that I don't accept. Signora Salzano, I have not converted to Christianity. I remain Muslim. I still believe Islamic teaching about Tawheed, pure monotheism, is correct. I still believe the Quran is the final revelation from Allah. I still pray 5 times daily, fast during Ramadan, hope to make Hajj to Mecca. But I now understand that Carlo was a true servant of Allah, whose memory deserves respect, not attack. And I understand that you, as a mother sharing your love for your son, deserve dignity, not humiliation. I also realize that my intellectual arguments against Catholic doctrine, even if I still believe they are logically correct, were delivered with cruelty and arrogance that contradicted the mercy Allah commands us to show. Please forgive me. I have no right to expect your forgiveness after how I treated you, but I ask for it humbly, and I promise that if I ever return to Aisi, it will be with humility and respect, not with arrogance and aggression. With sincere regret, Yusuf Al-Mansour. I read the email 3 times, crying harder with each reading. But these were completely different tears from the ones I had shed 3 weeks earlier. 3 weeks ago, I cried from humiliation, anger, self-doubt, and feeling abandoned by God. Now I cried from overwhelming gratitude, from recognition of God's perfect timing, from understanding that my humiliation had served a purpose I couldn't have imagined. God hadn't defended me that day in Aisi because he was preparing a better defense, one that would come not through my words, but through Carlo's intervention from heaven, reaching into the dreams of a Muslim imam who had come to attack and transforming him into someone seeking forgiveness. I responded to Yusuf immediately. Dear Yusuf, thank you for your email and for your honesty about what you experienced. I forgive you completely and without reservation. I won't pretend that what happened 3 weeks ago didn't hurt me deeply. It did. I felt humiliated, inadequate, and wounded. I questioned whether I should continue accompanying pilgrims to Carlo's tomb if I couldn't defend Catholic faith better. But your email has shown me something I needed to understand. God sometimes allows us to be humiliated, precisely so that the transformation he works afterward becomes a more powerful testimony than any argument we could offer in the moment. I couldn't defend Carlo adequately against your theological attacks, but Carlo defended himself and defended me by appearing in your dream and speaking truth you couldn't dismiss as emotional sentimentality. You remain Muslim, and I respect that, but you now recognize Carlo as someone special, someone whose life reflected genuine love for God, even if expressed through Catholic Christian theology. That recognition is grace for both of us. If you would like to meet when you return to Aisi, I would welcome that conversation, not as adversaries, but as two people seeking truth from within our different traditions. With forgiveness and peace, Antonia Salzano. Yusuf responded within hours, expressing profound gratitude for my forgiveness and confirming that he would return to Aisi in November, this time with the humility Carlo called me to in the dream. And he kept that promise. On November 9th, 2024, exactly 3 months after our first encounter, Yusuf al-Mansur returned to the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore in Assisi. This time, everything was different. He entered the chapel quietly, dressed in the same white Islamic tunic but with a completely different demeanor. Not aggressive confidence, but gentle reverence. He approached Carlo's tomb and spent approximately 30 minutes there, in what appeared to be silent Muslim prayer. Not prostration as in formal Islamic salat, but standing with hands open in dua, the informal prayer of supplication that Muslims use to communicate personally with Allah. I watched from my usual bench, giving him space, not wanting to interrupt what was clearly a private spiritual moment. When he finished, he turned and saw me. Our eyes met, and he approached with visible nervousness. "Signora Salzano, thank you for allowing me to return," he said quietly, speaking in a much softer tone than 3 months earlier. "And thank you for your forgiveness." "You are welcome here, Yusuf. This is a place of grace, not of holding grudges." We sat together on the bench, and I invited him to share more about his experience and what had changed for him. "After the dream," Yusuf began, "I spent weeks studying Carlo's life more deeply, not to find faults or contradictions, but genuinely trying to understand who he was, and what I discovered moved me deeply." "What did you discover?" "I discovered a young person who loved God with the same passion I try to bring to my own worship of Allah. Yes, he expressed that love through Catholic sacraments and devotions I don't accept. But the love itself, the surrender, the joy, the willingness to suffer for God's sake, that was authentic. In Islam," Yusuf continued, "we have a concept of fitra, the natural human disposition toward recognizing and loving God. Every person is born with fitra, but different religions and cultures shape how that fitra is expressed. I believe Carlo had pure fitra, even if it was expressed through Christian forms I don't personally accept." I asked. "So you recognize Carlo as holy, but within Islamic categories rather than Catholic ones?" "Yes," Yusuf nodded. "In Islam, we would call someone like Carlo a wali, a friend of Allah, not a prophet because Prophet Muhammad was the final prophet, but someone especially close to Allah, whose prayers are answered, whose life reflects Allah's attributes." "And can a Christian be a wali in Islamic understanding?" Yusuf paused thoughtfully. "Traditional Islamic theology would say no. Only Muslims can be awliya. But some Sufi scholars teach that Allah recognizes sincere devotion wherever it's found, even if expressed through imperfect theological frameworks. I'm inclined toward that view now, especially after my dream. We talked for over an hour, and our conversation became a kind of interfaith dialogue I had never imagined having with someone who had so aggressively attacked Catholic faith just 3 months earlier. Yusuf asked me questions about Catholic understanding of saints, of intercession, of how we distinguish between worship, latria, given only to God, and veneration, dulia, given to saints. I explained as best I could, acknowledging my limitations as a non-theologian, but sharing how Catholics actually experience these practices, rather than just their theological definitions. One thing I understand now, Yusuf said, is that when Catholics pray to saints, you're not worshipping them in the way Muslims worship Allah. You're asking them to intercede with God on your behalf, similar to how Muslims might ask a living righteous person to pray for them. I still think the practice is dangerous. It can too easily slide into actual worship. But I understand the intention is not idolatry. I appreciated his honesty that he still disagreed with Catholic practice, even while now understanding it better. This felt like genuine dialogue, rather than the aggressive attack of our first encounter. Toward the end of our conversation, I asked Yusuf what he planned to do with his experience. Will you share this with your mosque community? With other Muslims? He looked troubled. That's difficult. If I tell them I had a dream where a Catholic teenager corrected me, many will think I'm becoming soft on shirk or even secretly sympathizing with Christianity. Some might question my fitness to be Imam, but I also feel obligated to be honest about what happened. What does Islam teach about such situations? I asked. The Prophet Muhammad said that concealing knowledge is a sin. If I've learned something true through this experience, I shouldn't hide it just because it's uncomfortable or unpopular. But I need to find the right way to share it, emphasizing that this experience doesn't make me any less Muslim, just more appreciative of God's work beyond Islamic boundaries. Before Yusuf left that day, I gave him a small card with Carlo's image and a prayer asking for his intercession. You don't have to use it if it makes you uncomfortable, I said. But if you ever face a situation where you need help, remember that Carlo has already shown you that he can reach across our religious boundaries. Yusuf held the card carefully, looking at Carlo's image. Thank you. I will keep this. Not as an object of worship, but as a reminder that Allah's friends can be found in unexpected places. As he prepared to leave, Yusuf said something that brought tears to my eyes. Signora Salzano, when I first came here 3 months ago, I came to expose what I saw as Catholic error and idolatry. But Allah had a different plan. He used your humiliation, and I'm deeply sorry that I was the instrument of that humiliation to prepare the way for a testimony more powerful than any theological argument, that Carlo is alive spiritually, that he can appear in dreams, that he corrects pride with mercy rather than anger. Your inability to answer my arguments that day wasn't weakness. It was the necessary condition for Carlo to demonstrate that his intercession is real, his prayers are heard, and his influence continues beyond death. If you had defeated me intellectually, I would have walked away respecting your intelligence but unchanged. But because you couldn't defeat me, and yet Carlo reached me anyway, through my dream, I now know something my intellect alone could never have taught me, that there are forms of truth that transcend logic and argument. Today, 15 months after the initial confrontation, and 12 months after Yusuf's return visit, I understand what God was teaching me through that painful experience, a lesson I desperately didn't want to learn but needed to learn. For 18 years as Carlo's mother accompanying pilgrims, I had become comfortable in that role. I had developed reliable responses to most questions, created a kind of script for sharing Carlo's story, and built up confidence that I knew how to represent my son well. But that comfort had also created a subtle pride, not overt arrogance, but a quiet assumption that my role was to defend Carlo, to explain him, to make him accessible through my words and my witness. The confrontation with Yusuf shattered that assumption. It exposed brutally that my intellectual defenses were inadequate, my theological knowledge insufficient, my arguments incapable of withstanding aggressive challenge. And in that moment of humiliation, when I stood defenseless and inadequate, God taught me, Carlo doesn't need you to defend him. He can defend himself. My role isn't to win arguments or defeat objectors. My role is simply to love Carlo authentically, to share his story with genuine maternal affection, and to trust that when someone like Yusuf attacks with arguments I can't counter, Carlo himself will intervene, not through my words, but through his continuing spiritual presence that reaches even into the dreams of those who come to mock. Yusuf and I have maintained occasional contact since November 2024. He emails me every few months, updating me on his spiritual journey, sometimes asking questions about Catholic practice, sometimes sharing insights from Islamic spirituality. In March 2025, he wrote that he had given a Friday sermon at his mosque about recognizing righteousness beyond religious boundaries. He didn't mention Carlo explicitly. That would have been too provocative for his conservative congregation. But he spoke about how Allah can work through people of different faiths, how Muslims should respect genuine devotion to God, even when expressed through theological frameworks we don't accept. The response was mixed, Yusuf wrote. Some appreciated the message of respect and dialogue. Others accused me of compromising Islamic distinctiveness. But I felt I had to speak truth, as I've come to understand it through my experience. In July 2025, Yusuf made his third visit to Aisi, this time bringing his teenage son. I want Ahmed to meet you. He wrote beforehand, I want him to understand that Muslims and Christians can disagree about theology while respecting each other's sincere devotion to God. When they arrived, I welcomed them both warmly. Ahmed was 15, the same age Carlo was when he died, and I was struck by how Yusuf introduced me. Ahmed, this is Signora Antonia Salzano, mother of Carlo Acutis. Her son was a young person who loved God deeply, and his example has taught me important lessons about humility and respect. We spent an hour together, and I shared Carlo's story with Ahmed, much as I share it with any young person. His love for the Eucharist, his computer skills, his care for the poor, his joyful acceptance of suffering, his final offering of his illness for the Pope and the Church. Ahmed listened intently, then asked, if Carlo loved God so much, why didn't he become Muslim? Islam is the true religion. Before I could respond, Yusuf gently corrected his son. Ahmed, Carlo expressed his love for Allah through Christianity, because that's the tradition he was born into, and the way he understood God's revelation. We believe Islam is the complete and final revelation, but that doesn't mean people in other traditions can't genuinely love Allah and serve Him faithfully. I was moved by how Yusuf framed this, maintaining his Islamic convictions while also making space for recognizing Carlo's authentic devotion. The story of my humiliation by Yusuf al-Mansur and his subsequent transformation has become one of the most powerful testimonies in Carlo's cause for canonization. Church officials investigating miracles attributed to Carlo's intercession have included Yusuf's dream and conversion of heart as an example of Carlo's continuing influence beyond Catholic boundaries. Some Catholics are uncomfortable with this. They want clear conversions to Catholicism rather than Muslims remaining Muslim while recognizing Carlo's holiness within their own framework. But I've come to see Yusuf's position as its own kind of miracle, a bridge between traditions, a recognition that God's work doesn't always fit our neat categories. For me personally, the experience taught me the hardest lesson of motherhood, letting go. For 18 years, I tried to defend Carlo, explain Carlo, make Carlo accessible through my efforts. But Carlo doesn't need my defense. He operates from heaven with freedom I can't control, reaching people in ways I can't facilitate, building bridges I can't construct. My job is simply to love him, to share his story authentically, and to trust that when my words are inadequate, as they will often be, Carlo himself will step in to accomplish what I cannot. And if this channel has been an answer for you, consider leaving a super thanks. This financial help, however small it may seem, sustains this mission and allows us to continue bringing deep and transformative content to more lives that need this word. My name is Antonia Salzano. I am 59 years old. I am the mother of Carlo Acutis, who died at age 15 on October 12, 2006, and was beatified on October 10, 2020. On August 3, 2024, I was publicly humiliated by a Muslim Imam who attacked Catholic faith with arguments I couldn't refute, who called Carlo's memory idolatry, and who exposed my intellectual inadequacy in front of 40 witnesses. I felt devastated, inadequate, abandoned by God. I cried from rage and helplessness, questioning whether I should continue accompanying pilgrims if I couldn't defend the faith properly. 3 weeks later, that same Imam sent an email begging forgiveness because Carlo had appeared in his dream, correcting his arrogance not with anger but with mercy, speaking truth he couldn't dismiss. God allowed my humiliation precisely so that Carlo's subsequent intervention would be more powerful testimony than any argument I could have offered. My weakness became the canvas on which Carlo painted his continuing intercession. A Muslim Imam remains Muslim, but now recognizes a Catholic teenager as a friend of Allah. That bridge between our traditions was built not through theological debate, but through my failure to debate effectively, followed by Carlo's supernatural intervention. I learned the hardest lesson. Carlo doesn't need me to defend him. He defends himself, and sometimes God allows us to be humiliated precisely, so the glory of what he does afterward belongs entirely to him. This is my testimony. This is my wound that became grace. This is the day I was defeated, and how that defeat became victory I never could have achieved through my own strength.